What if that then puts in jeopardy the rand and the strength of the economy here in foreign direct investment? I mean, would you then maybe take a step back from this position?
No, we can't do that. Of course, there's going to be a bit of a setback. There's going to be an attack on our policy.
What kind of setback then are you anticipating if you are to nationalize something like the Reserve Bank?
A setback is going to be that we're disinvesting in a way of trying to intimidate us. It will not be for the first time where capitalists want to impose themselves on people through disinvestment. The only thing is, do you have alternative markets when they disinvest on this or that sector? Will these alternative markets come in? And then China is more than willing to come in. Russia is more than willing to come in.
But couldn't it potentially put relationships like that of the EU, which is a major trading partner for South Africa, in jeopardy if the country aligns even closer to Russia or to China?
Well, it's our self-determination. We cannot be told by EU who our friends should be and who our trading partners should be. If anything...
But there's some concern among investors when they hear about, especially nationalization of something like the central bank, how that actually gets the country into growth and into development and achieving some of these goals that you're talking about. I mean, how do you see this actually benefiting the country?
Well, it guarantees our sovereignty. These investors you are talking about, you will find them in many other countries. South Africa is one of the few countries in the world whose reserve bank is privately owned. So these investors that are going to be worried about us safeguarding our sovereignty have themselves invested in other countries where the reserve banks are owned by the state. So it will be inconsistency and an unacceptable thing to say, no, South Africa must not do it, and whereas you allow other people to do it and you still invest in those countries.
How would it work then if you were to actually nationalize the Reserve Bank?
It will be, the governor will be appointed by the state, and the members of the Reserve Bank board are going to be appointed by the state, and it will ensure that its sovereignty, it is based on the interest of the South African people.
What are those interests, though? And let's just talk about the private shareholders who, at this point, as you mentioned, are currently, holding shares in the Reserve Bank. I mean, what would happen with these entities then?
No, the private shareholders must be gradually bought out of the Reserve Bank, and we cannot allow a situation where we say no. At all costs, these private investors must stay because what about their investments? We are not an anarchist organization. We are a progressive organization that is going to gradually ensure that strategic sectors of the economy are state-owned. And it doesn't mean private sector can't play a role. It will play a role in other sectors of the economy, not on strategic sectors.
What if that then puts in jeopardy the rand and the strength of the economy here in foreign direct investment? I mean, would you then maybe take a step back from this position?
No, we can't do that. Of course, there's going to be a bit of a setback. There's going to be an attack on our policy, but the world is now evolving and changing into a different kind of world. There is a huge debate now to de-dollarize the economy of the African continent, and there are other markets outside the dollar that will be prepared to invest and boost our economy, and will use our mineral resources as well to boost our currency.
So what kind of setback then are you anticipating if you are to nationalize something like the Reserve Bank?
No, a setback is going to be that we're disinvesting in a way of trying to intimidate us. It will not be for the first time where the capitalists want to impose themselves on people through disinvestment. The only thing is, do you have alternative markets when they disinvest on this or that sector? Will these alternative markets come in? And then China is more than willing to come in. Russia is more than willing to come in, and we're able to close that gap. And we must equally start trading in a very big way with the African continent, because sometimes we don't invest from amongst ourselves. We over-rely on America and the West, whereas if we're to do business amongst ourselves, we'll be better off. So it shouldn't be that when that threat comes, we should be shaken. We should know it's going to come, and we should anticipate that when they come, these are alternative markets that are lined up to come and intervene.
But couldn't it potentially put relationships like that of the EU, which is a major trading partner for South Africa, in jeopardy if the country aligns even closer to Russia or to China?
Well, it's our self-determination. We cannot be told by EU who our friends should be and who our trading partners should be. If anything, the colonizers and the imperialist forces are not our ally, and we make no secret about that.
I mean, they're the biggest trading partner for
because the other markets are closed out. The biggest trading partners who can help us build power stations, if anything, they say destroy your power stations. And because we are their trade partners, we are unable to go beyond them and ask other people who can come help us to make our country a better place.
So what would then be, you've talked about everyone is a friend if they are working in the national interests of South Africa, correct?
Yeah.
What are those national interests? What would be priorities?
We need to safeguard the sovereignty of the South African state and make sure that its interests are first more than any other country. So, for instance, if you are to engage in a trade partnership, you always have to ensure that that trade agreement is beneficial and it is in the best interest of South Africa, not because the EU or Britain or America feels you need to go this direction, or else we will withdraw certain benefits that are there for South Africa. So that's what we're talking about, not people who are going to be saving the interest of our colonizer, the interest of the imperialists.
And why Floyd Shivambu? Because you said he should be the finance minister if this were to happen.
Well, Floyd Shivambu is the best economist this country has produced. He knows and understands the South African economy. He knows that South Africa has got 3 trillion debt, which is servicing. And out of that 3 trillion debt, 28 billion is an apartheid debt. So you minus 28 billion from the 3 trillion, you save a lot of money, because we must argue internationally that we cannot pay for a debt that was meant to kill us. So, and he will prioritize our people. It will not be just emphatic on austerity measures and a fiscal policy that is only interested in the markets and neglect the fundamental demands of our people, where we need to meet the most basic needs of the downtrodden.
Brilliant. What do you guys think about this speech? I think it was quite a really brilliant interview. The Bloomberg's journalist really asked really strategic questions regarding the world. And you know, one thing I'm usually, not worried, but I usually think a lot about it, how interconnected the world has become. Even though the world is really striving to become a much more multipolar world, we still somehow have this whole strand of the global village, connecting several parts of the world. And Julius Malema's policies, especially his choice for the finance minister, which is Floyd Shivambu, he's assistant president, or what you would call a vice president of the EFF, is really interesting. It takes me back to the only event in African history this takes me back to is Jerry Rawlins's relationships and relations with international capital at the time of the December 31st revolution in Ghana. I don't know how many of you know about that, but that was really a major research I conducted during my doctoral work. And it speaks about how at the time, Jerry Rawlins also, the PNDC government in Ghana also started on the left side of things, the left side of the political space. And most of the policies of the government at the time usually spewed out, left rhetoric that sort of like almost in a way placed the government on the socialist side of things and but not so long into the revolution. By 1983, the December 31st revolution began on December the 31st, 1981. And all through 1982 to the early phase of 1983, we could argue that Ghana was on a leftist, socialist-oriented path to participatory democracy. But by 1983 onwards, there was slowly a shift towards embracing now international capital. So the likes of the IMF and the World Bank structural adjustment programs by 1983. And we know this is a period where we see Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, what I like to call Thatcherism and Reaganomics on the world scene, pushing for the ideals of neoliberalism, especially in the global south. And also in Russia at the time, Russia was struggling, with I think some of the remnants of the Cold War and quite recovering from that. Prior to '89, we see Glasnost and Perestroika pushing Russia now into sort of what might be seen as a liberal shift, so to speak. But during this period of interaction with the IMF and the World Bank, I remember one of the complaints Rawlings had with the compatriots in the government and the progressives at the time in Ghana regarding their assimilation and their leftist orientation was the fact that it was all stored up in headed theories. Most of the leftist ideas were kind of like theoretical in that instance, and they sort of like struggled to translate most of the policies into workable, pragmatic solutions for Ghana at the time. And this was a major reason why Rawlings shifted towards more of the technocrats in the government who began interactions and began, negotiations with the IMF and the World Bank, and Ghana shifted more towards a neoliberal stance. While the revolution in itself continued to be communicated as a leftist style or revolution, Ghana was now much more on a neoliberal economic side of things. And in this regard, from 1982 all the way to 1992, during what would now be termed the Fourth Republic in Ghana, the elections in 1992, Ghana experienced what the IMF and the World Bank termed an economic miracle by shifting towards neoliberalism. But here we see the EFF has a different case, and especially during the Ghana's revolution, Rawlings and some of the compatriots of the government in Ghana at the time approached Russia for help, but because Russia was still tied up in a lot of troubles for itself and its economy, they really couldn't help much, especially on the financial side of things. So that was one of the major reasons as well that pushed Ghana more towards the IMF and the World Bank, what the EFF would usually call probably monopoly capitalists, so to speak, or representations of monopoly capital. But today we have a different, scenario. We have China really on the heavy side of things, what many have called a state-led globalization, that it's really spreading its wings, especially in the global south, with the likes of the Silk and Belt Road initiatives, and China really pushing into Africa and leading a lot of, development efforts in that regard. And Julius Malema here argues that, the Russians and the Chinese seem to be much more promising markets in case there's sort of like a de-investment from, the likes of probably the IMF, the World Bank, most Western financiers of South Africa's economy, which have been major partners with South Africa for a long time. And that if the EFF policies come to play, there might be a threat. It's interesting that Julius Malema understands that there might be a threat, there might be a disinvestment, there might be a fracturing of relationship, old long-term relationships that have been established with the economy of South Africa and probably Western, bodies. But having that, there's now an alternative, especially with the partners in the BRICS, which South Africa is a really important partner, and the likes of India, China, Russia. There seems to be an alternative, and that the EFF would really also strive to participate and try to engage more in intra-African trade. We know the AFCA movement, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement that strives to increase trade within Africa and between African countries, so to speak, which also reinforces Julius Malema's policies, the EFF's policies for free movement of Africans across that has actually been experiencing this resistance from the likes of Gayton Mackenzie's Patriotic Alliance and also Neil de Beer's United Independent Movement Party. So these policies are really interesting, and how the EFF will pull through on May the 29th, for me, is really interesting, because if the EFF comes through as president, it will really shake up a lot of things, a lot of historical relationships, a lot of policies that have actually placed South Africa to where it has been and where it is recognized to be today. And so I think it's really interesting. We'll keep watching. And the idea of Floyd Shibambu becoming finance minister, if that really comes to pass, I think that would be really interesting, because I've listened to him also. He has some really radical ideas on how to restructure the debts, the apartheid debt, which Julius Malema speaks about, and also a series of leftist-oriented policies regarding finance as a nation, for such a nation like South Africa that has become what it is today on a capitalist trajectory. But what do you guys think about this speech? I think it's really interesting. I'll keep on posting more of the speeches here. Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please share and like and subscribe, because that's the way you support Kwazemi as a channel, an Afrocentric channel, where we try to understand deeper issues in African history and hopefully develop a collective intelligence on how we wish to build the Africa we want to see as people of Africa. See you in the next one.